Voiceover begins. Have you ever heard a story that could change your perspective forever? Every Friday, she rose before sunrise, not for praise, not for company, just to bake cookies and send them to strangers in uniform. No name on the return address, just a mother who remembers. No one ever wrote back. Still, she never missed a week. Through storms, pain, and silence, she baked. Then one morning, the sky thundered. A Blackhawk helicopter landed in her cornfield. 6 soldiers stepped out in full dress uniform. One held a folded flag, another her son's dog tag, and the quiet woman in an apron finally heard the words, no letter ever carried. Who was she to make the military come for her? In the quiet heartland of rural Nebraska, down a dirt road, flanked by fields of golden wheat and rustling corn, stood a small white farmhouse with weathered shutters and a porch swing that creaked in the wind. It wasn't much, but to Edith Jenkins it was everything. Edith was 73 years old, though most folks in town would have told you she carried herself like someone who'd lived 3 lives. She moved slowly now with the gentle carefulness of someone who had known both great love and great loss. Her hands speckled with age, and a touch of arthritis had stirred more bowls and shaped more dough than most kitchens see in a lifetime. She had lived in Fairview all her life. The daughter of a mechanic and a piano teacher, Edith never left Nebraska, not for college, not for dreams, and not even after life broke her heart. Her late husband Carl had been a Korean War veteran and her high school sweetheart. They married young, raised chickens, baked pies, and raised one boy, Thomas. Thomas had been her pride, a soft-spoken boy with a crooked smile and an old soul. He'd grown up helping her in the kitchen, licking batter and carrying warm pies to neighbors. She still remembered the day he came home in his marine dress blues, standing straighter than ever, saying he wanted to serve something bigger than himself, just like his dad had. But in 2006, everything changed. A knock at the door. 2 uniformed men. No words could prepare her. Her only child, Corporal Thomas Jenkins, had been killed by a roadside bomb near Fallujah. He was 23 years old. Edith never remarried. She never moved. She just stayed. Retired now after 40 years as the beloved lunch lady at Fairview High, Edith filled her days with small things, church on Sundays, reading scripture in the mornings, baking for the local county fair. Her peach pies were legendary, winning blue ribbons nearly every year. But it wasn't the awards that kept her going. It was the memory of her son sneaking peaches off the counter as she worked. She still taught Sunday school at Zion Baptist, still brought casseroles to every funeral, and still hung her son's photograph in the living room beside the family Bible. The only soul she shared her home with now was Duke, a golden retriever with a gray muzzle who followed her everywhere. Edith lived modestly, just enough from her pension and Social Security, and never asked for anything more. She didn't own a smartphone, didn't understand Twitter, and didn't complain when the world moved too fast. But deep down, even after all these years, the hole in her heart had never really closed. She was a mother who had lost everything, and she was about to discover that the world had not, in fact, forgotten her son, or the quiet love she still poured into every batch of cookies. What if one small act could ripple across the world? It was a quiet evening in late fall, and the wind outside rattled the windows of Edith's old farmhouse like it was trying to get in. She sat alone in her living room, wrapped in a hand-knitted blanket, the TV casting flickering light across the faded photographs on the mantel. Her golden retriever, Duke, lay curled at her feet. The evening news was midway through a segment, another update from Syria. Edith usually watched with half her attention, but something made her look up. The camera zoomed in on a group of dusty, exhausted young soldiers resting under a tarp. One of them, barely older than Thomas, had grinned sheepishly and said, "I miss my mom's chocolate chip cookies more than anything. Just one batch would fix everything." The words hit Edith like a wave. Her throat tightened. The TV sound faded into memory, one she hadn't let herself revisit in years. Thomas had written her letters during his first deployment in Iraq. She'd kept them all bundled with a green ribbon in a box marked Tommy. In one he wrote, "Your oatmeal cookies made it halfway across the planet. Mom, the guys fought over them like they were gold. One of them said they tasted like home. That's what you do for people, you send home, even when it's far away." Edith's eyes welled. She rose slowly, steadying herself on the armrest. She walked into her kitchen, the same kitchen where Thomas used to steal spoonfuls of dough when he thought she wasn't looking, and turned on the oven for the first time in months. She didn't know who would get the cookies. She didn't need to. That night, she baked a batch of chocolate chip and a pan of snickerdoodles. She lined a tin with wax paper and tucked in a handwritten note. To any soldier far from home, stay safe. Baked with care from a mother who remembers. And just like that, Edith Jenkins made a decision that would ripple far beyond her quiet little kitchen. The first box was sent on a Friday. Edith Jenkins stood at the counter of the Fairview post office, her tin wrapped in brown paper and sealed with care. The clerk, young, polite but puzzled, asked where it was headed. Edith handed over the address she'd carefully copied from a map of U.S. military installations, Fort Freedom, Colorado. A base she'd never seen in a state she'd never visited. But that wasn't the point. That was the beginning of a ritual that would span years. Every Friday morning, Edith would rise before the sun, her back stiff, her fingers aching. She'd slip into her old blue cardigan, tie on the same apron Thomas had once gifted her, and start creaming butter and sugar by hand. Her kitchen smelled of vanilla and cinnamon before most of the town had stirred. She never knew who the cookies would reach. She never expected a reply, but still she tucked a note into each box, handwritten always. Sometimes it read, "From a mother who understands." Other times, "If you're having a hard day, I hope these help. You're not forgotten." Weeks passed, then months. Not a single reply came. No email, no call, not even a form letter. But Edith didn't stop. There were Fridays when her arthritis flared so badly she could barely grip the rolling pin. On those days, she sat on a stool to work the dough. When her old Buick wouldn't start, she called her neighbor's grandson to borrow a ride. If no one answered, she walked slowly, cane in hand, cookies packed into her tote bag. She missed church a few times, skipped social lunches, but she never skipped a Friday. People in town began to notice. Some smiled with curiosity, others rolled their eyes. "She's still doing that," a grocery cashier whispered one day. Edith just smiled. It wasn't about being noticed. Each ribbon she tied around a tin was a promise to Thomas, to herself, and to any soldier out there, feeling as alone as she once had. Friday became sacred, not because of routine, but because in a world full of loud noise and short attention spans, Edith Jenkins had chosen consistency, quiet, steady, faithful, and that was its own kind of courage. Could one woman's kindness rewrite a town's story? At first, it was curiosity, then it turned into whispers. By the second year of her cookie-sending ritual, Edith Mae Jenkins had become something of a mystery in Fairview. Folks at the diner called her the Cookie Lady, but not always kindly. The story had made its way through town like flour through a sieve, filtered, distorted, and half-remembered. "She's still sending those things to the army," one woman murmured over pie at Linda's cafe. "She just wants the attention," another added, stirring her coffee. You know how lonely folks get. Even at Zion Baptist, where Edith had taught Sunday school for over 3 decades, the air had shifted. Her prayer requests were quietly skipped over. Her greetings returned with half-smiles. During coffee hour, a few churchgoers would fall silent when she walked past. It wasn't hostility, it was distance, that hollow, polite kind. The final sting came from somewhere she never expected, Harrison's Hardware, the same place where Thomas had once bought her baking pans with his first part-time paycheck. The store owner's son had taken over recently. When Edith asked about the usual markdown on flour and parchment, he cleared his throat and said flatly, "We're not really doing personal discounts anymore. Maybe try ordering online." He wouldn't meet her eyes. Then came the blog post. It was written by a young local journalist looking to make a splash. The headline read, "Grandstanding Granny, Local Woman's Cookie Campaign Sparks Debate." The article called her efforts emotional patriotism disguised as charity, and accused her of performative nostalgia meant to stir veteran sentiment for attention. They hadn't even spoken to her. The piece went modestly viral in local circles. The post office clerk, once friendly, now offered only curt nods. Her neighbor Martha stopped waving. Even the grocery cashier hesitated before asking, "Still sending those cookies?" But Edith never raised her voice, never wrote a response, never left a comment. She just kept baking. Every Friday, her kitchen still filled with the smell of cinnamon and sugar. Her hands, though stiff, still shaped each cookie with care. Her notes, still handwritten, carried no bitterness, just quiet compassion, because Edith didn't bake for praise or recognition or approval. She baked because she remembered. She baked because soldiers were still out there, tired, homesick, unseen. And if the world had grown too cynical to understand that, well, then she'd just keep baking anyway. It was Friday morning like always. The house was still, the light outside dim with the early hush of dawn. Edith May Jenkins moved slower these days. Her hands ached more than usual, and her knees protested every step. But routine was a kind of grace, and she refused to let it slip. Not on the 416th week. The cookies were cooling on the rack, chocolate chips slightly crisp at the edges, just how Thomas used to like them. She reached for her note cards as she always did. But that morning, her fingers trembled more than usual. The pen slipped mid-sentence, leaving a dark blue smudge across the page. She sighed, ready to tear it up and start again. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the cold in her bones. Maybe it was the weight of all the Fridays behind her. Or maybe, just maybe, it was time. So instead, she kept writing. My son loved these before he was taken from me. That was all. No flourish. No explanation, just the truth, bare and simple. She folded the note, gently slipped it beneath the wax paper, sealed the tin with ribbon, and made her way to the post office without a word. The clerk didn't smile. Edith didn't mind. The package was on its way like always. What she didn't know, what no one could have known, was that this particular tin would travel farther than most. After sorting stops and 2 base transfers, it ended up nearly halfway across the world at a wind-blown, dust-covered place called Firewatch Outpost in northern Iraq. There it sat among crates of gear, mailbags, and stale rations until one man, tired, dirty, and worn thin by war, opened it. And when he read her note, the world changed, because Edith Jenkins had unknowingly sent her cookies to the last man who'd ever seen her son alive. Captain Eric Langford hadn't planned to open the tin that day. The mail drop had come late. The heat was relentless, the kind that coated everything in a fine layer of desert grit. His unit had just returned from a draining 48-hour patrol. Morale was thin, tempers thinner. The tin sat on his desk, out of place among the harsh metal and beige. It was old-fashioned, wrapped in wax paper tied with a soft blue ribbon. It reminded him of something, though he couldn't place what. Not yet. He opened it absently, half expecting crushed crackers or dried fruit. Instead, he found cookies, soft, golden, slightly crumbled from the journey, but real cookies, the kind no one had tasted in months, the kind that smelled like home. And then he saw the note. The ink was smudged. The handwriting a little shaky but clear. My son loved these before he was taken from me. Captain Langford froze. He read the return address again. E. Jenkins, Fairview, Nebraska. Something shifted in his chest. Jenkins. Thomas Jenkins. No. He reached into the drawer of his desk, pulling out an old laminated photograph. It was worn at the edges, a snapshot of his unit from years ago, young faces, most of them now ghosts, his own barely out of boot camp. And there, back row, third from the left, was Corporal Thomas Jenkins. Tall, quiet, solid. Eric closed his eyes. The memory came rushing back. The roadside, the dust, the second of silence before the world exploded. Thomas had been the one to shout. IED, he saved them. Warned the squad just in time to minimize the damage. 2 men survived that day because of Thomas's voice, because he'd been paying attention. Langford had knelt next to him afterward, cradling him as the medevac chopper circled overhead. In those last moments, Thomas had spoken through the pain. Mom's sending cookies. When I get home, Eric had remembered the words, but buried them deep. Until now. Until this note, this tin. This mother. Captain Langford sat motionless in his quarters, the desert wind humming outside, his hands trembling not from fear, but from memory. Edith Jenkins hadn't just sent cookies. She had sent a piece of her son. A promise long delayed finally delivered. And Eric knew in that moment he couldn't stay silent. Captain Eric Langford didn't sleep that night. He sat on the edge of his cot long after lights out, the empty cookie tin still resting beside him. The note folded gently in his lap. Something inside him refused to settle. For years, he had carried the weight of that day, of Jenkins's final words, of a promise that never had the chance to be kept. Now somehow that promise had found its way back to him, wrapped in wax paper and handwritten love. By sunrise, Captain Langford had made up his mind. This wasn't something to be filed away. This wasn't another folded flag sent through channels or a sterile military memo. This was different. It was personal, and it deserved something more. He began quietly. He contacted the last surviving members of Jenkins's original unit, some now retired, some stationed across the country. One by one, they responded. Every man who heard the name Thomas Jenkins didn't hesitate. Yes, sir. Wherever, whenever. Langford made the next call to a friend in the Nebraska National Guard. Not a formal request, more like a favor wrapped in reverence. The kind of call where rank mattered less than heart. She's been baking for soldiers every Friday for 8 years, Langford explained. She never asked for thanks, never sought attention. I think it's time we gave her something back. There was a pause on the line. Then, we'll make it happen. No press, no parades, just a private salute, a moment of truth between those who serve and those who never stop caring for them. Langford worked out the details with precision. A Blackhawk transport, off-duty but sanctioned, dress blues, a folded flag, a handcrafted plaque engraved with Edith's name, and most importantly, the dog tags Langford had carried with him since that day, Thomas's tags. The plan wasn't in any playbook. It wouldn't go through Pentagon channels. It wouldn't make headlines, but it would make history in one backyard, in one quiet town, for one woman who had spent 8 years sending love into the void, never knowing it had reached the hearts of men who still remembered her son. And when the day was set, Captain Langford folded the original note one last time, slipped it back into the tin, and packed his uniform. It was time to return a promise. Time to land where gratitude had been airborne for far too long. It was Friday. The sun had barely begun to warm the frost-covered fields outside Edith Jenkins's farmhouse, and the kitchen smelled of vanilla and fresh-baked snickerdoodles. The radio played softly in the background, just a whisper above the ticking of the old wall clock. Edith stood at the counter, tying a thin ribbon around the last tin of cookies. Her fingers trembled. Her arthritis had flared worse than usual, and her legs ached beneath her with every movement. But she pressed on slowly, methodically, like she had for 8 years straight. Then came the slip. Her knees buckled, the tin fell, cookies scattered across the linoleum floor. Edith tried to steady herself on the table's edge, but slumped instead to the cold tiles, winded and unable to rise. That's how her niece Ellie found her, home from college for fall break, walking in just as the cookies lay broken like autumn leaves, and Edith sat beside them dazed but conscious. Aunt Edith, Ellie dropped to her knees, helping her sit up gently. You should have called me. You're in no condition. Edith shook her head weakly, her voice barely a whisper. It's Friday. Ellie's eyes welled. She helped her aunt to the kitchen chair, wrapped her in a quilt, and began sweeping up the mess. Then came the rumble. Low at first, like distant thunder, but growing, the windows began to tremble. The teacups in the cabinet clinked, and then, unmistakably, the whump-whump-whump of heavy rotor blades echoed across the pasture. Ellie looked toward the window. Her jaw dropped. Aunt Edith, you need to see this. Outside, the sky was filled with wind and light. A Blackhawk helicopter hovered above the cornfield, its blades sending up waves of golden stalks and swirling leaves. It descended slowly like some great steel bird returning to sacred ground. Neighbors came pouring from their homes, some barefoot, others still in housecoats. Cell phones were raised, mouths fell open. The chopper touched down in the open pasture behind Edith's house, flattening grass and memory alike. The noise was deafening, then silence. The doors opened. 6 soldiers in full dress uniform stepped out in perfect formation. The late morning sun glinted off metals and polished shoes. One held a folded flag. Another clutched a small weathered chain, dog tag swaying gently in the wind. And at the back door of a quiet farmhouse, Edith Jenkins stood with her niece's support, watching the past finally arrive to meet her in full honor. The wind settled as the Blackhawk's blades slowed to a quiet hum. Dust danced in the golden sunlight as 6 soldiers standing at attention parted. From their center stepped Captain Eric Langford, his polished shoes crunching softly across the gravel path as he approached the back porch. Edith Jenkins stood there, frail but upright, one hand gripping Ellie's arm, the other clutching the edge of her cardigan against the breeze. Her eyes were wide but dry. Her voice caught somewhere between disbelief and wonder. Captain Langford stopped before her. Then, without hesitation, he raised his right hand and delivered a crisp, perfect salute. "Ma'am," he said, his voice clear and steady. "I'm Captain Eric Langford, United States Marine Corps. I served alongside your son, Corporal Thomas Jenkins." The name hit the porch like a holy whisper. Edith gasped softly, her free hand rising to her lips. The wind, it seemed, paused with her. Langford continued, his voice softer, now cracking at the edges. "I was with him the day we lost him. He saved 2 of us that morning, called out the IED before it blew. If he hadn't, I wouldn't be standing here." He reached into the breast pocket of his uniform and carefully pulled out a weathered, scratched dog tag, thin chain coiled like a memory in his palm. "I've carried this in my pocket for years. I didn't know what to do with it until now." He placed it gently into Edith's trembling hand. The porch fell silent. For a long moment, Edith didn't speak. She only looked down at the tag, her son's name etched into the metal, worn with time, but unmistakably his. She closed her fingers around it like a prayer. Then, Captain Langford stepped aside, and one of the other Marines stepped forward, holding a polished wooden plaque. Langford read aloud, "To Edith May Jenkins, for 8 years of faithful service to the spirits of the deployed. Through storm, silence, and sacrifice, your cookies reached across oceans. They reminded the forgotten that they were still remembered. And in my darkest moment, they saved my life." A hush fell over the crowd. Langford looked back at Edith, his eyes shining. "You didn't know, but your cookies traveled to 7 different countries. They were passed from unit to unit, shared in bunkers, opened on Christmas Eve, eaten during sandstorms and after firefights. Some soldiers never knew your name, but they felt your care. You reminded us why we fight." Tears now traced silent paths down Edith's cheeks. She tried to speak, but the words didn't come. Instead, she simply clutched the plaque to her chest with one hand and her son's dog tag in the other. Langford offered a small smile. "We don't have an official title for what you've done, ma'am, but we do have something more important." He turned to gesture at the soldiers lined behind him. "We call you Mother of Honor, and there are thousands of us who will never forget what you did quietly week after week. You kept a promise that wasn't even yours to keep." And with that, every soldier on the lawn stepped forward in turn and saluted her. The footage didn't take long to spread. Someone in the crowd had captured the moment Captain Langford saluted Edith. The dog tag, the plaque, the tears. Within hours, the video was on social media. Within days, it had traveled across the country. The cookie lady who never stopped believing. 8 years of kindness answered by a helicopter. A mother's promise fulfilled. News crews showed up on Main Street. National talk shows called. Offers poured in. Book deals, magazine features, even a request to light the opening pitch at a major league game. But Edith said no. Each time with the same quiet dignity she'd carried through every Friday for the last 8 years. "I didn't do it for cameras," she told Ellie gently. "I won't start now." She returned to her routine. Walk Duke sat in her rocker with a crossword, baked cookies not every Friday now, but enough to keep the rhythm of her heart in step. And yet the world around her changed. Zion Baptist Church issued a heartfelt apology from the pulpit one Sunday morning. Pastor Graham's voice cracked as he acknowledged what the congregation had missed. Not just the cookies, but the faith behind them. "We forgot what humble service really looks like," he said. Edith reminded us. The whispers stopped. The handshakes returned. The cold stares melted into warm hugs. At Fairview High, where Edith had served sloppy joes and apple slices to generations of students, the senior class voted unanimously to rename their annual fundraiser the Jenkins Bake Sale, because kindness travels. Even the blog writer who once accused her of showboating issued a public apology. "I got it wrong," the writer admitted. "Turns out real heroism doesn't always wear boots. Sometimes it wears an apron." But perhaps the most touching tribute came on the wall of the Fairview Public Library. Local artists came together to paint a mural 20 feet wide, spanning brick and memory. On the left side, Edith standing in her kitchen holding a tray of cookies. On the right, Corporal Thomas Jenkins in uniform, smiling beneath the soft hues of a sunrise. Between them in golden cursive letters, "Promise Kept." People came from nearby towns just to see it. Veterans left flowers. Strangers wept quietly in the grass. And Edith, she visited once early in the morning before the crowds arrived. She stood in front of the wall holding Duke's leash and looked at her son's painted face for a long time. She didn't say much, just one quiet whisper as the breeze stirred her hair. "You got them, Tommy, just like you said." Then she smiled, turned toward home, and walked away, her heart a little lighter, her promise fully kept. In a world that often moves too fast, where headlines come and go and kindness is rarely newsworthy, Edith May Jenkins reminded us of something timeless, that small, quiet acts repeated faithfully can echo farther than we ever imagine. She didn't bake for fame. She baked because her heart wouldn't let her stop. And somehow, in a world filled with noise, her silence spoke the loudest. What would happen if more of us lived like Edith? What if we did good without expecting thanks? What if we kept promises no one even knew we made? In today's divided times where disagreements drown out decency, maybe what we need most is a tray of warm cookies, a handwritten note, a gesture that says, "You matter. I haven't forgotten you." So, let us ask you, have you ever received a small act of kindness that changed your day? Do you believe one person acting quietly can still make a difference? Tell us in the comments below. Your story could inspire someone else. And if Edith's story moved you, if it reminded you of your own mother, your own service, or your own sacrifice, please like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because there are still people out there baking cookies, sending love, and fulfilling promises others forgot. And maybe, just maybe, you're one of them. Thank you for spending this time with us. We're honored to tell stories that still matter. Until next time, take care of each other and remember, the quietest hearts often carry the loudest. This has been Valor Stories.